Hello, everyone, the wonderful, amazing people of the mighty. We are here with Welcome to Empower Opportunity Youth Through Mentorship. That is what we are talking about in this glorious panel discussion today. And I am here, your moderator. My name is Dr. Allison Powell-Hicks, also known as Dr. Allie. I am a mental health and relationship expert. And I'm here with three amazing people, and they're all mentors in their respective spaces. I will let them introduce themselves, but I will tell you all their names. So first, we are here with Art Shanks. Next, Donovan Morris. And finally, we have Araya Baker. So gents, can you please introduce yourselves to everyone?
Yeah, hi, my name is Art Shanks. I'm a licensed clinical social worker that's working for Making Connections in Chicago, Illinois. We're based out of Mount Sinai Hospital, which has been serving Chicago's West Side communities for over 100 years now. And more specifically, we're based out of Under the Rainbow, which is their children and adolescent psychiatry and behavioral health department. What we do with Making Connections is we train men from 3 different communities here in Chicago: North Lawndale, Little Village, and Chicago Lawn, on the effects of trauma and different aspects of mental health. Those men range in age from 16 all the way up to 65 currently, and we're still looking for older. And we match those men with young boys from the community for a mentoring program. And that's us in a nutshell.
Beautiful, thank you. Donovan.
Hello, my name is Donovan Morris. I'm a youth board of director for the Legends of Lawndale program, as well as a mentor for the La Vie to Warrior program.
Araya.
Hello, I'm Mariah Baker. I'm a therapist, educator, and writer. I currently work at a college counseling center, but the themes of my work, just broadly, school mental health, also focusing on identity development and socialization. And with regard to that, specifically focusing on like masculinity, son-father relationships, and mentorships between boys and men of older generations.
Fabulous. I am like so inspired by all of you. Looks like we just lost Donovan, but I'm sure he'll be back soon. And I wanted to get the conversation started because obviously we're discussing and talking about mentorship, specifically within communities of color. And so there's some very specific needs and specific things going on in those communities. And so I would love it if you could give us, from your perspective, what you feel like the role of mentorship is in some of these communities.
Yeah, awesome. I'll take the lead on that one. Really what we're looking to do with any Making Connections program here in Chicago is we're trying to create a space where young men, specifically young men of color, Black men in North Lawndale, and that's Latino men in Little Village. We are looking to create a space where they can feel safe to be themselves, to explore who they are, to learn who they are, and to share their talents and share their vulnerability with others. And we also put a major emphasis on normalizing talking about feelings and emotions and just general mental well-being. We think that mentoring is very much about modeling what it means to be a holistically well person in our communities.
It's beautiful. Anybody else have a perspective on, like, their perspective on mentorship?
Yeah, I guess for me, working in schools, I had a unique position as like a school counselor and a school-based therapist. And it's interesting because Black males are underrepresented both in terms of teaching and counseling. And a lot of the boys that I worked with, Black boys, boys of color in general, had never met a therapist of color who was a guy. And so for me, I guess one of the core aspects of mentorship is sort of giving kids, I guess, something that they can envision. You know, you can't really ever strive to become something that you've never been exposed to, that you have never even been able to fathom. So that's one aspect of it. And I think also just healing intergenerational trauma. You know, as oppressed folks, we've dealt with so much over the centuries and have focused so much on survival, but not necessarily had the time or the resources to heal and to repair some of the relationships that, you know, within our community can serve as stressors, unfortunately.
The difference between surviving and thriving, right? Yeah. Anybody else? If Donovan, you want to say anything about this one?
About mentorship, I feel
Yeah,
like
what it is to you.
Being in a unique role where I've been a mentee, moving to a mentor so fast has me in a position where I'm still like learning a lot while also trying to relay that information as soon as I learn it. So it's really interesting when you see other kids being in the same position that you were in not so long ago and trying to make sure that they follow a similar path to where they feel like they're comfortable enough to be a mentor to somebody else has really been a unique and very interesting role that I've been put in, and I've like very appreciative of it. And I think that's something that more people should be doing. I feel like more younger mentors should be teaching more people their own age and bouncing ideas off each other and learning from each other as well as older mentors.
Yeah, I love that idea. There's the experience of the tyro, which is someone who's new to something tends to do it in a very creative new way. And then also you have this point of contact where you have more in common possibly, and then that dualistic, that learning from one another. That's beautiful. And something Art said is leading me to another question, which is this idea of space, right? How can these programs within these communities help create space for these young
about physical space. We're talking about also the comfort level, the atmosphere, the milieu, for lack of a better word. And realistically, we have to think about the spaces that our young people are coming from. Our young men are living in communities that are disproportionately experiencing trauma here in Chicago. And the three communities that we're working with, it's not uncommon for our young men to know people who are victims of gun violence, to have been victims of gun violence themselves, even. And what we're looking to do is we're trying to create a space where they can feel safe, where they can feel like they can openly be themselves, where they can take off that armor that protects them out in the community, even protects them in their school, and just be themselves, be a 13 or 14-year-old boy.
Absolutely. And I think those are a few things that we will hopefully touch on later, this idea of having to put up this shield, this constant armor, and how do we create this, like you said, this milieu, which is more than a physical space, it's an emotional space, it's a whole cultural space. Beautiful. Anybody else? Nope. All right. I think that is beyond phenomenal and leads me, I can't see Donovan's face. So Donovan, did you have something you want to say?
No, I didn't.
Okay, good. All right. So that leads me to my the next point. So some studies have shown that mentoring benefits Black young men and young men of color in general in a number of different ways and in a number of different areas. And some of those include in academics, in socio-emotional well-being, in mental health, health with relationships with others, and also in preventing risky behaviors. So expand on some of these areas and some of the challenges and changes that you may have seen in some of the young men that you've worked with in the past.
I'll take the lead on this one, and I'm going to go back to a point that Araya made just a few minutes ago, and that is that, you know, a lot of young men in our school settings don't get to work with other Black men. They don't get to work with other Latino men, and they don't know what it means to be successful as a Black man or as a man of color. I'll just say in general, and that is very very harming potentially for those young men. What we would like to see is for them to see different aspects of masculinity, to see different aspects of what it means to be a healthy man, and to have those spaces where, again, they can explore that without being critiqued. And then also being candid, we talk about this a lot in our program. We don't necessarily look to see the increases in those behaviors that we were talking about before, in terms of like seeing improved grades. Like, yes, it's great if a kid is going from a C student to a B student, if they're really getting a better education. But what we're really looking to do is to improve connection, to improve supports that are within that young person's life, to make sure that they feel like they have a safe person that they can rely on, that they can talk to about issues. What we find is that so often in communities like the ones we work in, a kid starts acting up, and the first thing that happens, or they start performing poorly in school, and the first thing that happens is they get pulled from these supports. They get pulled from mentoring programs. They get pulled from sports programs. And realistically, those are the things that are having the young men supported. They're the things that are keeping the young person going. So we are very adamant about not tying our program to those kinds of metrics, because we don't want to discourage those young people from showing up. And then additionally, we're dealing with this barrier of young folks who are going to school and potentially having a bad day at school, and potentially seeing that as a deterrent for staying in programming if we're only focusing on those metrics again. So again, we just really want to create a space where those young folks can feel like they're supported, where they can feel like they're loved, and they can just be themselves.
Absolutely. A lot of times our young men are the ones that are penalized for things that maybe kids in other communities would not be penalized for, but would be given a lot of support and attention for. Absolutely. Anybody else?
Yeah, just to add to that, I would add to Art's point about representation. I think while representation is super important, it's also important to highlight that it's not just about the example. It's about it's about redefining masculinity, and I think that's something that a lot of our boys don't get exposure to, at home with family, among their peers, or in any other setting. And so, I often tell men when I'm talking about mental health that yes, men are privileged in terms of gender, but when it comes to suicide prevention and mental health, men are actually, and this is men of all races, are actually at higher risk for suicide and higher risk for most mental health disorders, simply because men have less trusting relationships, which means that they're more socially alienated and more likely to, feel as if they don't have any source of hope. So in schools, for me, that's looked like being the one person who maybe acknowledges that a Black boy is dealing with self-harm or suicidal ideation, things that are usually associated with like white youth. We think of cutting, for example, as something that white teens do. But there's a whole self-harm epidemic among Black teens as well. And so just keeping in mind that when it comes to mental health and suicide prevention, their risk is really compounded, by being both male and Black. And the same applies for boys of color too.
Yeah, and so sometimes we can get distracted by a lot of the ideas that we have of groups, right? People maybe meaning well will think like, well, maybe this isn't something that affects that group, so I'm not going to look for it. But I think that is really important to highlight the fact that within this community, there definitely are these things that maybe just hasn't historically been looked at. Doesn't mean it's not there. Maybe people haven't been searching for it, partly because of the way they view the population. There's this kind of Superman, Superwoman dynamic, and the study just came out that was reinforcing how medical doctors, white medical doctors in particular, do not pay as much attention to and looking at Black maternal mental health, physical health and morbidity and mortality, and how that could be another implication of that, where now we're seeing that there are higher levels of suicide in the African American community than maybe people had reported before, and that there is self-injury and things like that. Thank you so much, Araya, for highlighting that. And so Donovan, so in regards to the challenges and changes that you've seen when working with mentoring, I would really love to hear your perspective on that, as a person who recently was in mentorship. So looking at, what are some challenges that you've seen?
I think some of the biggest challenges that I've seen is really being able to distinguish myself from their own situations and not being able to give my direct input into what I think they should be doing and what I think is best for them, because it fluctuates on what I would do rather than what is right, because I was a mentee recently. So anything that I do, I have to think about, okay, is this the right way to do it, or is this the right way to go about it, or anything like that. And it's been a struggle because I can't influence, I can't tell them like you can't do this or you can't do that. I just have to hope that I can guide them on the right path to doing such. And being in a mentee position recently has really given me perspective on what we expect our mentors to say and what we expect them to act like and what we expect them to do. And it's a lot of pressure because like being a new mentor is kind of like I have to make sure that I'm upholding those guidelines and being the right person that they need to talk to, or being them there for them in the right time of need and everything.
Absolutely. There is kind of that intersection in like, when do you give advice? When do you listen? When do you have to get a little like straight up with someone like, okay, wait 1 second, 1 second. It's like a dance. And I think that is something that time can teach you. And sometimes you just make mistakes and learn on the way. and this kind of gets me thinking about because looking at, like, I think Art had mentioned creating like this allowance for love and empathy, and as opposed to some limit setting behaviors. And it gets me thinking about the school to prison pipeline, and how this is something that we see so much in our schools in Black and brown neighborhoods. Do any of you have any opinions or comments on maybe what you've seen with this pattern? And maybe we can explain for our viewers what the school to prison pipeline even is.
Yeah, I can take a push at it, and if there's anything I overlook, please feel free to add on. But the school to prison pipeline is this concept, this idea that we have taken a lot of the love out of our schools and made them so penalizing, so about limit setting with young people instead of fully understanding who they are as people, that we're pushing them out of schools and towards dangerous behaviors that will lead them to prison. We're getting them rap sheets before they're even out of school. It's a very common thing for kids to be arrested in their schools now. And that's something that we should really pause and evaluate if we're trying to help young people. Is it appropriate to have police officers on campuses if their place is to arrest children? And is that something that we really want to see happening with teens? And if you're me, that's an obvious no-brainer. No. We want our kids to be able to, again, have moments where they're able to make mistakes and still, again, have that allowance for love. There's definitely this idea within a lot of the communities that we work with that the only way to approach young men of color is with tough love. They need to toughen up. They need to be respectable, and all these other coded languages and coded messages that we've received for decades, frankly. And what we really have to do is find a way to create, again, that space where a young person can be themselves, can have that unconditional regard. It's like, yeah, I messed up yesterday, but when I get to programming on Wednesday, I know that Donovan's going to love me anyway, which is what he does. He does a really good job with that. And if we're able to do that, we're able to create a relationship, which is a protective factor from so many different risky behaviors that we were talking about earlier. And again, gives that young person a resource or a shoulder to lean on if times do get hard.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And I think that it's something that a lot of people aren't fully aware of, that there are officers on campus. So if you're in like a middle class neighborhood, an upper class neighborhood, you get in a fight with a kid at school, your parents get involved. You maybe have a meeting with the families and you write an essay that apologizes and you all move on, But in certain schools, you may get in a fight that another child would get in a fight, the same type of fight, but you end up in jail at the end of the day. You end up in handcuffs at 9, at 11, at 13. Yeah, I think that that's a good thing for people to be aware of. Did anybody else want to talk about that pipeline or anything else about anything? Mm-hmm.
Just briefly, just to expand upon what Art said, I think a lot of it also goes back to this idea really rooted in anti-Blackness that, Black youth are worthy of being disposed. Well, I don't believe that they have a future. I don't see potential. So what's the harm in, disappearing them into the system versus investing in rehabilitation or treatment? And I think it's odd, but I'm also thinking of COVID. Like, our country has this way of sort of preferring very reactive measures to things that like could be easily prevented if we would be willing to have the faith that, you know, those preventative measures would actually lead to, you know, less recidivism, you know, less negative life outcomes. And then on top of that, there's the adultification of Black kids, including Black girls. This idea that a request for respect is a demand to be in charge. What these kids are asking for is to feel, you know, validated and seen and heard. But when you're coming into the school setting with these preconceived notions about Blackness, sort of like the same preconceived notions that causes, you know, police officers to see Black skin as a weapon, you are any type of, you know, call out or feedback or constructive criticism as confrontational. And so a lot of these kids actually aren't even being disruptive, but it's the perception in response to their very valid concerns that often gets misconstrued.
I love that point that, you know, perception shapes reality. So my level of dangerousness, your level of dangerousness doesn't always have anything to do with our actual dangerousness, but the assessment that's being given to us by the person perceiving us. And that's based on the beliefs that that person has, their own, you know, schemas from their own life. So the biases that they've developed, and that we now find ourselves living in this environment, like you're saying, like the adultification of Black children, looking at Tamir Rice, who was, you know, I think he was 12 years old, 11 years old, you know, playing with a toy gun. And we have so many images of kids playing cops and robbers outside of their house. This is a classic American kind of Americana image, right? Kids with very realistic looking toy guns, and they get to have all the fun in the world, but then you can't have a super soaker at the park without being a threat. And this leads me to also think about how all of this trauma, you know, leads to mental illness in kids in our communities. And what role do you gentlemen see this trauma playing in the lives of these kids that you're mentoring? And then after that, what are some things that agencies in the area could really do to try to address some of these trauma-based, mental health-based issues? Anybody can go.
I guess I'll go.
Like Art always starts it.
You know, I guess it's alphabetical. I don't know. But I mean, for us, we really do take a proactive approach of training our mentees, our mentors on the effects of trauma. We try to train community partners on the effects of trauma. We try to train, and I should also be clear, those community partners include school paraprofessionals, teachers. We want everybody and their mother really to know about what trauma is. So we talk a lot about where trauma affects the brain. We talk a lot about the amygdala. The terminology that we use is we like to put everything in kind of simple, very easily understood ways. So we talk about the prefrontal cortex as the wise owl that allows you to make good decisions. We talk about the hippocampus as your elephant, you know, long-term memory. You got to be able to remember everything, right? And then we talk about the amygdala as the guard dog, right? And that amygdala is what picks up on trauma. And when that guard dog starts barking, all of a sudden that owl can't hear that elephant, right? And all of a sudden it doesn't really so much matter what the owl needs to think about. It matters about being safe right then and now. And we really want to make sure that people understand that when a kid's experiencing trauma, like it doesn't have to be real. It just has to be perceived, right? It has to be something that affects their life in a major way. And it's constant, right? If you're growing up in a community where you're hearing gunshots constantly, or where you know your friend got shot, where you know your older cousin got shot, that's going to be on your mind. And it's really hard to separate that out when you're being told to go into school at 8 o'clock in the morning, eat breakfast, and just go right into like math. It's like, well, maybe I don't want to hear about math right now. Maybe I need to like understand that I'm not going to get shot.
First of all, I'm stealing that. So just, I'm gonna have to put your name on it, but like owl, guard dog, elephant. I think that is a beautiful narration of how trauma and how different regions of our brain inhibit other regions
So
and
that's from
impact
Becca
the way.
Krause. That's from Becca Krause, not me.
Oh,
That's
Okay, I'm gonna have to write that down because I'm taking notes over here, y'all. Y'all, everyone watching should be taking notes right now because this is some good stuff. That's fabulous, Becca. Thank you. Anybody else?
To add on to what Art was saying, I think it's very important that we understand that when you're in a traumatic situation, like being at my age or even younger, like you don't even have to really fully understand what's happening. If you know you're in danger, like Art said, that guard dog is barking. And if that's the part you're relying on the most in any situation, even if it's not like as serious as it sounds, you're going to rely on that guard dog and you're going to jump to him first before anything else. And living in a community where it is dangerous to go outside or it is unsafe to like go to the park, or like how I think you said it was using a water gun at the park could be dangerous for kids of color. It's just something where you're like, anything I do could put my life in danger. So I always have to be on a 10, I always have to rely on those survival instincts. And when you go to school, you're like, I don't really care about this because this isn't going to help me survive. It's not going to like keep me alive. It's not going to keep me safe in the streets learning about math or learning about English. And a lot of these kids, that's how they're seeing it. That's how they're viewing it, because they want to focus on the here and now and keeping themselves safe and trying to improve their own situation as fast as possible. And we, as an community of Hispanics, African Americans, we've been led to believe that the easiest way to get our situation better, like Araya had said in a previous call that we did yesterday, was that we're believed that money is the best way to get to that.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're trying to think about the fastest. We're focusing on surviving and making money as fast as possible so that we don't have to live this way anymore. And what else have we been taught? Rapping is the fastest way. Making money through that, making money through illegal activities have always been showing up. This is like they're just focused on making money to improve their own situation, which is why they get into certain things like this, because their brain is always on a 10 thinking about what I got to do to survive and what I got to do to get myself out of the situation.
Exactly. And it's exhausting to be in this constant survival space. It's hard to, like you were talking about earlier, like encode these memories. And one thing, not that I was an athlete growing up. My dad was an athlete, and he used to always tell me, and also being a girl, there's not a lot of space for you to grow in athletics. I played softball. There's nothing for that. No pro softball. And my dad would always say, like, medical schools take in more students, more Black people than any basketball team in the country, right? Everyone who's drafted to the NFL, basketball, every sport, there are more doctors that get into school every year than that. And when it comes to school, it's just about sitting there, being bored sometimes, being stressed, but it's a privilege, right? It's hard to be able to do these things that we know can take you to a different space when you might not have, you won't have the money, because that's the whole problem now, these student loan things. And so we have these spaces that, by nature of the privilege that it takes to be a part of it, like how could you do a year-long internship where you make no money? If you're the one making money for your family, that's not even realistic. So now the fact that your family doesn't have enough money to now give you a stipend so you can live for free, now you don't have an opportunity to do something that could actually grow your life in a very substantive way. And it's easier to do than to become a football player or a basketball player. And so those are some really good points, Donovan. And we did have that conversation yesterday. And so I want to hear from Araya as well, because I think he has a unique perspective on this.
Yeah, as a counselor, it's, I guess the saddest thing about trauma that I've witnessed is sort of that it can create a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like some of the very symptoms of trauma, hypervigilance, emotional dysregulation, lack of executive functioning, overreaction, overreactivity, all of those things are very criminalized in our schools. And so, again, it goes back to this conundrum of like, well, at what point finally realize that it's better to invest in preventative measures, these reactive punitive measures. And I think to answer the part of your question about what can folks do, of course, like equipping kids with emotional vocabulary. And I see all of these these articles about mindfulness being incorporated in school. I think all that's great, but like, if you zoom out and think of like the big picture, what I would really hope is for educators and mentors and anyone else working with you to understand people can be systemically traumatized too. Like, trauma is not just an accident or like a single incident. Like, people can be chronically traumatized by systems, getting stopped and frisked and thrown on the pavement by a police officer is traumatizing. When you have 3 siblings to drop off at 2 different schools before you get to school, and you're 1 minute late, and every single day your teacher is slamming the door and locking it, and you're 30 seconds late every single day. And now, you are dealing with the system with regard to truancy and all that's like that. All of that is traumatizing. And so, it creates a cumulative impact of just like being on edge all the time. And so when a lot of traumatized kids snap, you have to understand, like, it's not just in reaction to whatever the trigger was. It's in reaction to so many other you don't see on the surface. I think the best thing that people can do is really stop and be curious. Wait for them to calm down just a bit, and then just be curious, and as opposed to judgmental, because they're so used to people automatically off the bat, like, assuming why they're angry and what ticked them off and, who they are. But if you stop and just ask, like, oh, like, what was that about? Like, how do you feel? Like, get out the feelings wheel and say, like, can you point to hundreds of emotions? Like, is there a specific memory that you're thinking of right now? Like, really validate that, there are real lived experiences and systemic trauma behind these, disruptive behaviors that you see.
Absolutely. And the idea of curiosity really has me thinking about the cultural competency, maybe even more so than the ethnicity of the mentor. But how do you 3 gentlemen see cultural competency of the mentor impacting the quality of these mentor-mentee relationships?
I'm gonna start this one.
Art.
Art.
He's like, not this time.
I feel like it's kind of, I won't, how do I say this? It's like aging their mind like far, sometimes in a different way than what they should. Some of these kids aren't acting like kids anymore. And it's because they can't, it's not, they don't get the chance to act like kids. They're being treated as if they're older. Like, I know a lot of the kids, when we go to our programs, they talk about subjects where you're just like, do you really, like, how do you know about that? Like, or how are you talking, like, you're talking about that like he's into politics. Like, I know there was a kid there, Kadan, he'll sometimes talk about politics like he's getting ready to vote. And I'm just like, you're really smart. Like, you're really trying to make a difference. And it's like, it's not because, and it's great that he acts like that, but you gotta understand, like, this kid, he's been treated like he's older all his life, where he told me himself, he's just like, I gotta stop acting like a kid because they don't want me to act like a kid anymore. And a lot of these kids are at that same level where they're just like, I can't act like a kid anymore. Like, there's some kids that go down the street, they need to be walking, they can't walk in a group because even though they're all like 10 or 11, they'll still get stopped by the police. Just for the fact that they're African Americans, and there's a lot of them, so they think they're going to do something even though they just got off school. And they come to school and they're just ready to, like, I'm done with this, I don't want to do this anymore, there's no reason to come here, like, it's not worth it. A lot of them have those type of attitudes, and it's just because of the way the system has been treating them. Like, they go to school and a lot of teachers treat them like they've already done something wrong, even just getting there, because they're just expecting that from them.
That just hurts my heart just to think about feeling so. It makes me feel trapped, that there's nothing you can do, with somebody who doesn't have a cultural competency, that there's no way they can really understand your perspective and where you're coming from. And they instantly make you an adult. They instantly make you more mature. And I think a part of it too is there are some studies to show that African Americans sometimes do mature and appear older, especially to groups that do not have an understanding of that culture and community. Like, even looking at the research into identifying like witnesses that making identifications, that if they're of another group, another ethnic group, they have a hard time even telling the difference between different people. of another cultural group. And so I feel like even what you're speaking to is even on an emotional level, sometimes these people have a hard time identifying what a Black child acts like, right? And not applying this adult perspective onto this child who needs to be a child. And instead making them an adult when it's not their time. Any other cultural competency perspectives?
Yeah, I think that Donovan did a great job of really outlining what it means to be a kid coming from one of these communities potentially and not being understood. And I want to tie that back to something that Araya was talking about earlier, and that's just having that curiosity to know, like, to want to know what's going on with these kids' lives, right? Because if that curiosity is lacking, you're assuming you know that kid's life. You're assuming that this kid's just acting out, so you're going to take that personally, right? And that's going to only damage that relationship. And frankly, it's going to damage that relationship that the kid is able to form with adults in the future as well. You know, so we want our people that come in to be trained as mentors in our communities to really want to know about our kids, to want to care about our kids. And then I know that we talked about this a bit before, but we want them to be able to understand certain aspects of what the kid's life is like. I'm not originally from Chicago. I know that Donovan's going to make fun of me for this, but I say a lot of things that he thinks are country, you know, because I'm from Ohio. He loves to call some of my sayings country or like Southern, and so and you know it's recognizing that, you know, like, this is something that I might not know about, but if I'm going to be culturally competent, I need to be curious. I need to know that, this is what this kid's going through. I need to hear him. I need to let him be him.
Yeah.
And if I might add real quick, from my own personal story, when I was younger, I was always like, I was picked on, right? So when I was in middle school, I wasn't the whole class clown, but I was like the sad one. I would take over when the class clown was out of town or something. So I was picked on a lot, like, by teachers. And even it got to the point where even when I didn't say anything anymore, it's because I just felt like I needed that kind of validation, like, to make somebody laugh. Like, if we're being real, like, that's how it made me feel good when I make other people laugh. So sometimes I would understand, like, it wasn't always right to do it in the middle of class, but sometimes when I felt down, I felt like making other people laugh would make me feel better. So even when I wasn't doing that anymore, or even when I stopped, I was still getting called by teachers. Like, anytime somebody else would do something, I would get blamed for it. And that just, like, started me, like, every time somebody said something, they were like, Donovan, don't do this, or Donovan, don't do that. It started, like, having, it was kind of traumatic, you know? I was getting like, okay, now it was starting to irritate me every time. So then I would get to high school, and then I lashed out on a teacher because she called me. And it wasn't even because I was doing something, but it's just in my mind, I'm like, okay, she think I'm doing something else. Or she has never, like, that was like the first day of school. She has never seen me before. She knows nothing about me or what I do or anything like that. So, but just the fact that she called on me and she thought I was doing something just triggered all of those other times I've been called on, and all those other times where I was like annoyed or irritated, even though I told myself I don't act like this anymore. It was still triggering because I'm like, yo, like, why are you talking to me? And it's just like, there's a lot of kids that feel that same way. It might not always be about being a class clown or something, but it's just sometimes you'll say something to a kid and you'll get a reaction that you weren't expecting, and you'll just like think, okay, this kid always acts like this, or he's always like this or that, instead of being, like you said, curious and being like, okay, maybe there's a reason why this particular thing set him off or this set him off. So there's a lot of people who come into the culture and like don't know that African Americans have been through a lot of trauma, and a lot of African Americans could have multiple triggers that you're activating, and you're just blowing it off as that's their attitude or that's their personality, instead of trying to figure out what makes them upset or what takes them off.
Listen, yes. I mean, and I think that's where that cultural competency piece comes in, and understanding that people do things for a reason. People are not illogical. If someone has gone off on you, there is a reason they went off on you. It might not be you, but there's a reason, and getting curious can help you understand. Yes. Araya, anybody?
Yeah. I mean, I don't have too much to add. I just think that based on what I've seen, lack of cultural competence, both in schools and mental health, really, is sort of this hero complex that helpers often have, like this saviorism that's well-intentioned, but when you approach people with the mentality that you're saving them, you oftentimes don't see their strengths. Like all you see are the deficits. And that's very apparent in a lot of like the research and the literature on Black youth. It's always, you know, so many of the descriptors are negative. They have negative connotations. And it's like, well, do you even really care about this population? Have you even spent enough time in this community to really understand the assets and the strengths that these folks have? And I think a lot of times folks are willing to get into the work for themselves. You know, it's sort of an ego stroke. Like, look at me, like I'm helping people. And it also feels good to help people, but it can't just be about you. And I think that's where cultural humility comes in, like being aware that you don't know everything. You know, like you may have 50 different degrees, gone through 500 hours of training, but if you're walking into a community you've never spent time in, you have to start from square one and get to know, you know, that community, that culture, that population brand new. And so I personally, in talking to educators and counselors, I challenge folks to be strengths-based, to really push against this idea that like these kids need more grit, because they already have enough grit in navigating these systems that are designed to disempower them, you know, at every turn. And I think, you know, like I am a big fan of like resilience and like inspiration and like these stories of overcoming, but it's also like, well, how much superhuman grit do we want these kids to have, and why? When there's so many other kids who have, you know, crutches and unfair advantages, and yet they go farther, and we pretend the kids who got left behind don't have the grit. Who knows how far they would have gone if we would have, you know, seen their underestimated strengths and, you know, their untapped potential.
Absolutely. And it makes me think about normalizing some of these experiences and helping these kids understand if anybody was put through what you're put through, they would feel like heavy. They would be angry. They would be like, it's not just you. Nothing's wrong with you. If any human was put in these exact same circumstances, they would probably respond in a way that's more similar to the way you're responding. And that's why when I think about cultural competency, I have a friend named Thea Monnier, and she's an excellent therapist here in LA. And she has this program she's put together where she's teaching therapists, specifically ally therapists, so white therapists who are interested in helping Black people and brown people and people of color in general, how to decolonize their therapy. And how this idea of this, like, you know, this hero complex of like, I'm going to go into these, you know, Black and brown areas, and I'm going to save them through my miraculous knowledge and intelligence and give them my own culture. You know, it's where we got colonization from, this idea that you have to come into these areas and teach them in your way. And if they don't learn and they can't be educated in your way and speak in your way and dress in your way, then they're just not, you know, worth your time. And I think, and she does a lot of work in learning and teaching people how to decolonize and how to separate from these old narratives and tap into this curiosity that I've heard all of you speak on, and tap into empathy and love and strengths-based, like an understanding, like you said, like how much more grit do these kids need? They're full of grit. The fact that they can survive on a daily basis, if we dropped somebody else and from another neighborhood into this area, they would be terrified. You have women crossing across the street. If somebody, you know, my color, and, you know, my husband's brown skin, he's like 6'6". He walks down the street, people cross the street. And I'm like, but you say we need more grit, but you can't even stay on the sidewalk. It's like, come on, lady. Like, these kids are fabulous. And leaning into these benefits, I think, and not benefits, but the strengths that these kids naturally have, I think is so much better than tapping into, well, you need to fix this. You're wrong. You're this. It's just instantly the finger comes out, and it's just like, what is this? Where are we now? And so boom, boom, boom. So what are some things, so getting to the next question, what are some things that you have found is actually like really helpful with mentoring some of these young men that you've worked with? Connections, feelings, things like that. What has been helpful for you?
Some things that have been helpful for me. It's been a little bit harder in some ways than it's been easier with me, because me being close to their age, they don't really see me as an adult talking to them. So it's been, there's pros and cons to that. So like the pros is that, they're going to be honest around you, right? They're going to talk to you how they would talk to their friends. And even though you're not trying to encourage that, sometimes you have to take advantage of that because they're going to be truthful and they're going to tell you what they might not tell Art, or they're going to tell me like something that they might not say to Becca. And I've been trying to like use that as kind of like a gateway to get into what do they really feel, or what do they really like want to talk about, or how they really think, so that I could better try to help them out if they have a problem or they have an issue. I kind of know where they're coming from because I know how they talk and what they talk about and everything like that. So it's been kind of help. Just that's my age as myself has been kind of helpful. I think something really helpful is the fact that you have to go into any situation with an open mind, and you cannot start with any like, okay, this is goes for anybody, right? I'm talking on anybody. You can't go into a school and automatically start judging, right? That's obvious. You can't go in there and be like, okay, this is an African American school, so they're gonna like this and they're gonna want to do this and that. You can't, because you don't know how these kids are gonna act. Like there's kids in our school that don't like basketball, and they get irritated because they assume that this is what African American people play, right? So they're just like, okay, all of you like basketball. So when we play like sports, they have to sit out because they don't want to play that. So they're like, I don't want to play this. I want to play something else. They're getting irritated. So you can't just assume anything with these kids. And it's been helpful talking to them like you would talk to somebody who understands. You can't, like, with these kids being at the level that they're at, they, like I said, they had to grow up. So you can't talk down to them. You have to talk to them like you're talking to somebody that's almost of you. Can't talk to them the exact same way, but you have to give them more respect than what you would give a normal kid. Because they've been through more than normal stuff, right? So when you talk to them, you can't sugarcoat some stuff. Like you can't be like, okay, when you went outside, are you hurt? Like, what hurt you? Or, like when you talk about that type of stuff, you want to be straightforward and you want to be honest with them, and you want to tell them like, um, Kadan, like when I talk about Kadan a lot because me and him, like I was helping him a lot, right? So you can't talk to him and treat him like a kid, but give him advice that you would give adults. You have to do it. You have to keep it even, you know?
Absolutely. Any other perspectives, yeah, on some of the things that you see that are really helpful with mentoring?
I think Donovan hit everything on the head. So I'm just, yeah.
Boom.
Thank you.
Boom.
He nailed so much, but I just want to leave two other points that are, I think, critical, and that we really emphasize with all of our mentors and even our mentees. And that is just being, like we like to say, RAF, real as you can fill in that blank, being authentic, being yourself, bringing that in to every situation. It's really important. Kids aren't stupid. Adults aren't stupid. We know when someone's telling the truth. We know when someone's not telling the truth. And when someone's being their authentic self, it lends itself to wanting to connect with them. So we really put a huge emphasis on being authentically yourself at all times, owning your feelings. If you're mad, that's okay. Tell people you're mad, and show that it's healthy to be mad, and that you don't have to be punching a hole through a wall or punching somebody if you're mad. Own it and show how you handle it. So just that, again, that authenticity more than anything, it's big. And I know I said 2 points, but now the second is escaping me. So
you'll think of it like tomorrow morning. You'll be like, I wish I could go back and say it. But and that kind of leads me to think about, like, so how do you all identify somebody that will be an effective mentor? What are some traits you look for, some concepts?
I think I was looking for a couple people to join our program a while ago, and what I thought was like what I was looking for, like those qualities, is that somebody who is already having who's already kind of in that position, in that kind of mindset where they feel like what they've been through, they've got over it, right? So those challenges that they had to come over, those challenges that they had to face, they got over it and they've learned from it for the better, and they feel like they're ready they can help somebody else get over those type of things. It was a lot easier I can tell you what I did look for, because that list is a lot easier for me. I wasn't looking for anybody arrogant, because for obvious reasons, like they're in that hero complex. If you put them in a mentorship thing, they'll feel like this is something that they have to do. Like, okay, I'm helping this person. And sometimes those kids don't really want help. They just want somebody to listen to them. It was a lot easier to not look for somebody who was always like constantly making any type of jokes. They didn't have a filter, because you have to have a filter around these kids, otherwise you're just going to start encouraging the type of behavior that you show yourself, and knowing that behavior isn't something that you really want to pass on to like a mentee. You're not really going to help their situation. You're just kind of enabling them to act a certain way, or encouraging those stereotypes that everybody already puts on us. So I was looking for somebody who was very open-minded and who understood that everybody has their flaws and everybody has their own strengths, and those strengths are what we need to look at. I remember when I went to go look for Alex, which is another kid who works in our program, he was somebody who always listened before he spoke, and I thought that was really important, because if you listen to somebody before you speak, your chances of having a successful conversation with them drastically goes up. So those are just some qualities I was looking for and not looking for.
Fabulous.
And building off what Donovan said, oops, sorry.
Oh, go. I was just using my hands. I was like, I don't know which way is which now. Go ahead. I'm used to being with people.
I'm sorry, same, right? We're adjusting to this digital world. It's a real odd and awkward place. But Donovan nailed it. We're looking for open-minded individuals. I think that in working with schools for our mentoring programs, a lot of people want us to bring in nothing but doctors, astronauts, attorneys, people with like 1 million letters after their name, like we were talking about earlier. But realistically, for our program, the people that have the most success are the ones that can make fart jokes, fifth grade humor. We're looking for people that like kids can connect with. We want them to be able to, again, be their authentic self. Do we want someone talking about like how hard their life is all the time? Probably not. We want someone to be able to empathize and really connect with those kids. Again, I can't say the word connect enough. It's just really, really our fundamental value, which is, again, connecting with kids where they're at and allowing them to discover who they are while feeling like they have unconditional regard in the process.
Yeah. And what about this dynamic between kind of like giving the appearance of being together, this idea of being polished as opposed to maybe really reflecting some true connection?
Yeah, so I was actually about to speak on that. Thank you for segueing. But I think that's so important. And I think that starts with people who don't judge themselves. You can't really be authentic with someone else or, empower someone else if you're always judging yourself, and I think a lot of folks, or something I really like about mentoring as opposed to counseling, in counseling, it's not really encouraged for counselors to disclose anything. It's not really encouraged for you to talk about your own growth area, weaknesses, things that you've overcome. Not necessarily to make the session about you, but to like talk about relevant things that your client could do. But what I like about mentoring is that there's a place for all of that. I can show that, like I have weaknesses just like everyone else. Like I have areas that I'm working on just like everyone else. But that doesn't mean that I'm like ashamed of who I am. And I think that's an important example, teaching young people that despite your quote unquote flaws or whatever, like you still see yourself as like dignity and self-worth and purpose and value. Your shortcomings don't negate your inherent worth as a human being. And I think that's so important with mentorship, because so many mentees have been sort of overwhelmed and indoctrinated by these systems that really make them feel disempowered and demoralized and invalidated, really.
Absolutely. Any more comments?
Yeah, I really want to build off of Araya's last point there, and it's so important that we in mentoring programs don't do that same damage going on. I know that we talked a little bit about respectability earlier. It can't be about just having these young men be respectable. It's got to be about them having self-discovery. It's got to be about them having connection and positive regard for themselves and others. And a lot of that trickles down from funders and, like, again, the intention of the mentoring program in the first place. We're very lucky with making connections here in Chicago that our funder, which is the Movember Foundation, I didn't mention them earlier. I should mention them now. Way to go, Movember. They gave us the luxury, they gave us the freedom to build the program that our youth needed, to build the program that our men needed, and not forcing us to fit a circular peg into a square hole, you know. And that's a lot of programs in this country right now that are saying, hey, you've got to know how to tie this tie. It's like, well, what do I need to wear a tie for? Where am I wearing this to? You know? And that's just our reality. And again, I can't thank Movember enough. I think that the work that they've allowed us to do is truly transforming our communities.
Fabulous.
I also want to add on to what Ara was saying too, and what Araya was saying, is that it's like what mentoring, we want to make role models, right? We want to give our youth more role models, because when you think about it, if we're talking about in the African American community, our role models are all in some sort of entertainment, right? It's like Will Smith, like Michael Jordan, like it's always entertainment. There's nothing like, you don't like, if think of like a famous black doctor off the top of your head, or like an entrepreneur like off the top of your head. Like, it's a lot of kids can't, because that's not what the media has portrayed us to want to aspire to be. They want us to be in entertainment. They want us to keep doing, like, belittling us to say, oh, if you're not athletically capable, then you really don't have any merits towards anything, or you're not really worth much. It's like we want to give them role models to look and see ourselves as being like, we want to change what it means to be, like, in this case, an African American male, or a Latino male, or any type of any youth. We want them to give them a chance to look past that and see, well, I don't have to be in entertainment to be successful, or I don't have to be in entertainment to be happy with myself, or that's not necessarily what I need to do to be my best self. We want them to look further beyond that and just be like, well, I know that my mentor Donovan said that I can do anything that I want. He, give them that type of inspiration where they feel like, I don't have to play basketball all my life, or I don't have to do this. I always was a little, like, we try to encourage them. Like, I always did like art a little bit, get them to pursue that, if anything. Or I know some kids want to go and they want to start a business, get them to pursue that too. Just anything that they feel like they have like a little inkling for, anything that they feel like is close to opening up. We want to help them open up that door for them, so that they'll be able to explore it further and get that possibility and find that answer for themselves.
That's beautiful. Having a career that allows you to think for a living, to come up with ideas for a living. You don't have to be strong every day. And if you have a day where you want to stay in bed, you can still do work. If you're a basketball player, you can't do that. You got to be out there, I love that. And so we are coming up to the end of time. So I wanted to tap on this question real quickly. What are some changes that you would like to see in mentorship opportunities and in the mental health care system in general? And we'll end on that one.
I guess I'll go first quickly. I guess I would expand upon what everyone else said about just like this focus on professionalism and assimilation and respectability. Are we trying to build professionals? Or are we trying to build people? And I think that's the same for the mental health field. Like, give men and boys space to really like recreate who they are and transform. And even with career counseling, like, so little of career counseling is actually coaching. A lot of it is helping people understand their story and their narrative to find their purpose. How can you do that if you're so fixated on a uniform or a tie?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Very quickly, I would talk about just access. I know that we've done a really good job of talking about the whole respectability thing But access is such a fundamental aspect of why people aren't necessarily connecting to mental health resources. I think fully understanding like how difficult it is for someone to get from point A to point B is something that our system doesn't do a great job of. Here in Chicago, you're talking about having to cross gang lines, having to often wait for public transit for ridiculous amounts of time. And it just can be really hard. And I think that when you don't consider those things, that the resource that you develop isn't accessible and people don't use it. And then all of a sudden you can't, people try to take that resource away. So yeah, that's what I would add.
That's it.
So, really, without going too deep into it, I think what I want to see change most of all is seeing a culture for these kids to be proud of, because when you think about it, like if I know I talk about African Americans a lot, but even there are some Latinos, just getting them to know their roots, know the culture, giving them something to be proud of, because in this country they took everything from us. Like, we don't have a culture to be proud of. Like, what it means to be Black has almost all negative connotations. Just giving them something like to be proud of, knowing where they come from, knowing what it means to be really Black, and knowing what it means to be really Latino, giving them that feeling that they can be proud of something could maybe give them more motivation to want to do better in life and want to do better in their community. And maybe they might want to spread that forth. So maybe we can start actually developing a solid, good, like very understanding and helpful culture for African Americans, which is something I want to create, because I just want us to have something that's not connected to this country that we can be proud of.
Ooh, that is a beautiful note to end on. Ooh. I wanted to thank all of you for watching, for commenting. I wanted to thank our panel members, Art, Donovan, Araya. Thank you so much for being here. This was a panel on, empowering opportunity youth through mentorship. I am Dr. Ali, and bye. Have a nice day.
Thank you so much.